You know, there are words that stick to you like glue. They cling to your bones, settle in your chest, and even 30 years later, you can still hear them ringing in your ears. For me, it was 1991. My son Ethan, 18 years old, sharp as a whip, full of dreams bigger than our small town, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, I'm ashamed of you." I'll never forget that moment. We were standing in the kitchen. The evening sun was slipping through the curtains, and the smell of grease from my work jacket filled the room. I had just come home from a double shift at the machine shop, hands still black under the nails no matter how hard I scrubbed. My wife, Margaret, had set dinner on the table, meatloaf his favorite. But Ethan wasn't hungry. He had that restless energy, the kind only kids on the edge of leaving home seem to carry. He paced around, his voice sharp, impatient. "Dad, I don't want to end up like you, working with your hand, sweating in some dirty shop. My friends ask what you do, and I don't even want to tell them. I'm embarrassed." Those words hit harder than any machine accident ever had. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, with that mix of arrogance and insecurity that only a teenager can deliver. His eyes were on fire with ambition, and I could tell he wanted more than anything to run far away from the life I'd built. Margaret tried to soften it. "Ethan, your father works hard so you can go to college. You should be grateful." But Ethan wasn't hearing it. His voice cracked as he shot back. "I don't want to tell people my dad works with wrenches and oil. I want to be someone who matters." I didn't say much that night. Truth is, I couldn't. My throat was tight and all I could manage was, "Son, this job, these hands, they're what's putting you through school. Maybe one day you'll understand." But inside, I was crushed. I had spent nearly 2 decades breaking my back, working nights and weekends, missing ball games and birthdays, just to give him a chance I never had. And here was my boy, my only son, ashamed of me. I swallowed it down. I always did. I told myself that if he made it, if he got that degree and climbed into a world I couldn't touch, then maybe, just maybe, his words would stop echoing. Maybe he'd see that I had been carrying him on my shoulders the whole time. So I let him go. That fall, I put in even more overtime hours at the shop to cover his tuition. Every scar on my hands, every aching muscle in my back, every drop of sweat was a brick in the road leading him to college, but the words never left me. Ashamed. It sat in me like rust, eating at the edges of my pride. And here's the thing I never told him. I wasn't ashamed of myself. Not once. I was proud of the work I did, proud that I could fix what was broken, proud that my hands built a life for my family. But I was ashamed that my son couldn't see that. 30 years later, life turned the tables. Ethan lost his job, the one he built with that shiny degree. He came back home, shoulders slumped, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. And in that moment, standing in the same kitchen where he once told me he was embarrassed of me, I had a choice. Hold on to that old hurt, or give him the one thing he never understood back then, my dignity, wrapped in the form of a battered old toolbox. That's where this story begins. When people ask me what 1991 felt like, I tell them it was the year of sacrifice. Every morning before the sun came up, I was already pulling on my steel-toe boots, buttoning my grease-stained shirt, and heading to the machine shop. The smell of metal dust, hot oil, and burned steel was the air I breathed. My hands stayed cracked year-round, no matter how much Margaret tried to soften them with lotion she left by the sink. I wasn't a man with a degree. I didn't wear suits or shake hands in boardrooms. I turned bolts, cut metal, and hauled parts heavier than I probably should have. My coworkers used to joke, "Dan, your hands are your resume." And maybe they were right. My pride came from the things I could build and fix. That's the life I knew. But in our small home, just 2 blocks away from the shop, I carried a different dream in my chest. That dream wasn't for me. It was for Ethan. Ethan was everything I wasn't at his age. He was sharp, curious, and restless. Where I saw problems that needed fixing, he saw possibilities. He'd sit for hours with books spread all over the kitchen table. Biology, physics, literature. He devoured them like I devoured overtime hours. I saw the fire in his eyes and told myself, this boy's going places I'll never reach. My wife, Margaret, was the glue holding us together. She had a calm way of softening edges, like warm honey over rough wood. Whenever I came home bone-tired and short-tempered, she'd meet me at the door with a soft hand on my arm and whisper, Dan, remember why you're doing this. Remember the boy. And she was right, I was doing it for Ethan. At 18, he was on the brink of leaving our little world for college. The acceptance letter from State University had been the proudest envelope we'd ever opened in that house. Margaret cried with joy. I remember Ethan's grin, the kind of grin that splits a boy's face in half and makes him look like a little kid again. And me? I stood there quiet, with the letter shaking in my calloused hands. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I knew exactly what it meant. More hours, more doubles, more weekends away from family. Every cent I earned, every shift I worked past exhaustion, was going to fuel Ethan's dream. And I told myself I could take it. But underneath the pride, there was that wound, the memory of him saying he was ashamed of me. It lingered. Even as I drove him to campus in my beat-up pickup, his duffel bag bouncing in the back, those words were in my ears. We pulled up in front of the dorms and kids were everywhere, laughing, hugging, hauling boxes. They wore clothes I could never afford, sneakers that cost more than a week's groceries. Ethan looked like he belonged with them. I looked like a man out of place, an oil-stained relic from another world. Before he left, I put a hand on his shoulder. Son, remember, every hour I work, I'm working for you. Make it count. He gave me a nod, not a hug, not even a smile, just a nod. And then he walked away. Driving home alone, I kept one hand on the wheel and one on my thigh, where the grease and dirt of my shift had stained through my jeans. I thought of Margaret waiting for me, probably holding back tears, and of Ethan's back as he disappeared into the crowd. That was the start of his journey, and in a way, the start of my silence. I never told him how much his words cut me, how heavy they sat in my chest. I figured one day, when he had a career, a house, and children of his own, he'd finally understand. But in 1991, all I had was faith. Faith in my son, faith in my sweat, and faith that someday he'd see that dignity doesn't come from a diploma. It comes from showing up, day after day, with hands willing to work. What I didn't know then was that life has a way of flipping everything upside down. The boy, who once couldn't bear to admit what his father did for a living, would one day walk back into my kitchen, broken, jobless, and looking to me for the very thing he had once despised. That part of the story was still decades away. But in that moment, 1991, I was just a father with a proud wife, a hopeful son, and a pair of tired hands that still believed in something bigger than myself. It's strange how time folds in on itself. One day, you're watching your son step onto a college campus, full of fire and ambition, and the next, you're standing in your kitchen again. Only this time, he's not walking away into his future. He's walking back, shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of failure. It was the spring of 2023 when Ethan came home. By then, I was 77. My back didn't let me work full shifts anymore, but I still ran a small repair shop out of my garage. Folks in town came to me with broken lawnmowers, old farm equipment, anything that needed fixing. I liked keeping busy. It gave me purpose, kept my hands from forgetting the work they were made for. Margaret had passed 5 years earlier. The house was quieter without her laughter, but her memory lived in every corner. Her curtains still hanging in the kitchen window, her handwriting on recipe cards in the drawer. I kept going for her and for myself. And then, one afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, there was Ethan. 50 years old now, gray at the temples, suit wrinkled, tie half undone. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Behind him, his car sat in the driveway, clean and polished, but I could see the repo sticker half peeled off the corner of the windshield. "Dad," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "Can we talk?" We sat at the same kitchen table where, 32 years earlier, he told me he was ashamed of me. The same table where Margaret once tried to calm us both down. I poured him coffee, but his hands trembled too much to drink it. "I lost my job," he finally said. "The company downsized. 30 years of loyalty gone in a single meeting. I tried applying everywhere, but no one's hiring. I'm too old, Dad. Too old, too expensive, and I don't know what to do." His voice cracked, and for the first time in his life, I saw my son cry like a child. I didn't know what to say at first. Inside me, there was a storm. Part of me wanted to remind him of those words, ashamed, to throw them back at him the way they'd echoed in my mind for decades, to ask, "Are you ashamed now? Ashamed of being jobless while I'm still working with these hands?" But when I looked at him, his shoulders sagging, his face lined with regret, I didn't see arrogance anymore. I didn't see the boy who once thought he was better than me. I saw a man stripped of pride, desperate, broken, and my heart softened. He rubbed his face, trying to hide the tears. "Dad, I'm supposed to provide for my family. My daughter's in high school, looking at colleges. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. I feel like I've failed them. I feel like I've failed you." Failed me? Those words stuck in my chest. For years, I thought I was the one who had failed him by not being the kind of father he wanted, not having the kind of job he could brag about. And now here he was, looking at me like I was the only person who could help him. I leaned back in my chair and studied him, his manicured hands, once smooth and soft, now clenched into fists on the table. His suit, expensive once, now hanging like a costume on the wrong man. He looked like he'd built his life on foundations he thought were unshakable. Degrees, promotions, salaries. And when it all came crashing down, he had nothing solid to stand on. Meanwhile, me, with my calloused hands, my cracked knuckles, my decades in the shop, I was still standing. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The choice burned in my mind. Do I let bitterness speak for me? Remind him of the pain he caused me in '91? Or do I do what a father does, pick up his child, no matter how old he is, and help him find his footing again? Margaret's voice came to me as if she was right there in the room. "Dan, remember why you did it all. You didn't work those hours for yourself. You worked them for him. Don't stop now." I knew then what I had to do, but making that decision wasn't easy, because offering Ethan a way forward meant more than just giving him work. It meant giving him back the very thing he once despised, the life built with my hands, the dignity of honest labor, and I wondered, would he accept it, or would he reject it all over again? That was the question that kept me awake, listening to the silence of the house, waiting for morning. The morning after Ethan told me he'd lost his job, I woke before dawn like I always had. Old habits don't fade, even when the world tells you to slow down. My body may have aged, but it still stirred at the same hour when factory whistles used to blow. I brewed coffee, the smell filling the quiet house, and sat at the table staring at the steam rising from my mug. I thought about Ethan upstairs, asleep in his old bedroom. It was strange seeing him there again after so many years. The posters of rock bands he once idolized still clung to the walls, edges curled and faded. His trophies, dusty and forgotten, lined the shelves. He had come home not as the triumphant man he always tried to be, but as the same boy who once told me he was ashamed of me. And yet, in my heart, I felt no anger. The years had sanded down the sharpness of that wound, though it still left a scar. What I felt now was something heavier, responsibility. When Margaret was alive, she used to tell me, "Dan, being a father doesn't end when they turn 18. It doesn't end when they leave for college or when they start their own family. It ends when you stop being needed, and a father is always needed. Her words came back to me as clear as the morning light. Ethan needed me now more than ever, not to pay his bills, not to lecture him on mistakes, but to show him that dignity wasn't lost, it was waiting for him. So I made a decision. When Ethan finally wandered downstairs, his hair uncombed, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, I was already waiting. "Morning, Dad," he muttered, embarrassed, as though being under my roof again stripped him of the confidence he once carried. I gestured for him to sit. "Ethan, I've been thinking. You need work, and I've got more than I can handle in the shop. Starting tomorrow, you'll work with me." He blinked, stunned. "Work with you?" "Dad, He hesitated, the pride still clinging. "I don't know the first thing about fixing machines." I leaned forward. "Neither did I, once. You'll learn. A man doesn't need a degree to find purpose. He needs willing hands." He looked down, his jaw tight, fighting something inside him. Maybe shame, maybe fear. "You really think I could do that? After everything?" "Son," I said firmly, "your hands may not be calloused, but they're not useless. You've spent years using your mind, but now it's time to learn what your hands can do. Tomorrow morning, you're in the shop with me. No arguments." He nodded slowly, defeated, but also relieved. I saw it in his eyes. Beneath the layers of lost pride, there was a glimmer of hope. That evening, I went into the garage. Against the back wall sat an old rusted toolbox. My toolbox. The one I had carried through every shift, every overtime, hour, every sacrifice I had made for my family. Its corners were dented, the paint chipped, the handle worn smooth from years of use. Inside, the tools rattled softly when I picked it up, each one with a story etched into its steel. I ran my hand across the lid, and in that moment it was like holding my entire life in one place. This box wasn't just metal and tools. It was the symbol of everything I had endured, every hour of overtime that paid for Ethan's tuition. Every night I came home too tired to speak but too determined to quit. Every insult I swallowed when people looked down on me for being just a worker. And tomorrow I was going to give it to him. It wasn't just about putting a wrench in his hand. It was about passing down a legacy, a lesson that had taken me decades to understand, one he had ignored in his youth. That dignity doesn't come from the title on your office door, but from the work you're willing to do with what you have. I placed the toolbox on the workbench, wiped the dust from it, and whispered, "Tomorrow, old friend, you'll belong to him." The next morning, Ethan walked into the shop, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of a suit. He looked out of place, awkward, like a man stepping into a world he didn't belong to. I gestured toward the toolbox. "Before we start, son," I said, "there's something I want you to have." His eyes shifted to the battered box, confusion flickering across his face. "This was mine," I told him. "Every dent, every scratch, every mark on it is a piece of my life, and now it's yours." Ethan reached out, hesitating, then placed his hands on it. His fingers traced the scars in the metal, and I saw his throat tighten. He whispered almost to himself, "Dad, I don't deserve this." I put a hand on his shoulder. "No, you don't. Not yet, but you will." And with that, the stage was set for the moment that would change everything. Ethan stood there in my garage, his hands resting on the old toolbox as though it might crumble under his touch. The sunlight filtered through the dusty window, catching the scratches in the metal lid, turning them into scars of light. He didn't lift the box at first. He just stared at it like it was something too heavy to carry, not in weight, but in meaning. I watched him, my chest tight. For decades, that toolbox had been my lifeline. It carried me through layoffs and lean years, through times when I didn't know how we'd pay the bills. Inside it were the same tools I'd used to build our home, fix our cars, and earn the money that sent him to college. To me, it wasn't just steel and wood. It was everything I had ever given. "Go on," I said quietly. "Open it." Ethan clicked the latches and lifted the lid. The smell of machine oil rose into the air, mingling with the sharp tang of iron and rust. His fingers moved across the worn handles of the wrenches, the chipped screwdrivers, the hammer with its wooden grip worn smooth from years of use. He picked up a wrench, heavier than he expected, and turned it in his hands. "Dad," he whispered, "I used to look at these and think they were nothing. Just tools. Just junk. I thought I was better than this." His voice cracked. "And now, standing here, I realize these tools fed me. They put me through school. They kept a roof over my head." He swallowed hard, his eyes glassy. And I was too blind to see it. I felt my throat tighten. All those years of silence, all those nights I wondered if he'd ever understand. It was breaking open right here in this garage. I stepped closer. "Son, these tools are more than what they are. They're a reminder. Life will break you down. Degrees, titles, jobs, they can all be taken from you. But if you have these, your hands, your will, you'll never be without dignity." He set the wrench back in the box and looked up at me, his face raw with emotion. "Dad, I was wrong. About you, about everything. You weren't the one to be ashamed, I was." For a moment, the silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of cicadas outside. Then Ethan closed the toolbox gently, almost reverently, like it was a sacred object. He gripped the handle and lifted it, his shoulders straightening under its weight. "I'll work with you," he said firmly. "I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes." I nodded, but there was something more I needed him to hear, something I had held back for 30 years. "Ethan," I said, my voice low, steady. "Back in '91, when you told me you were ashamed of me, I carried that with me for years. It cut deeper than any injury I ever had at the shop. But I never stopped working for you, because a father doesn't stop when his son hurts him. He keeps going, so one day his son will understand." Tears welled in his eyes. "And I do understand now, Dad. I do." He set the toolbox down and did something I didn't expect. He pulled me into a hug, a strong, desperate hug that felt 30 years overdue. I froze for a second, then wrapped my arms around him. His shoulders shook against mine, and in that moment, the bitterness, the hurt, the decades of distance, they all melted away. We stayed like that for a long time, two grown men in a dusty garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and the sound of our own breathing. And when we finally pulled apart, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Pride. Not pride in himself, not pride in the life he thought he was supposed to build. Pride in me. Pride in the father he once couldn't claim. That night, as we worked side by side fixing an old lawnmower someone had dropped off, I watched Ethan's hands fumble with the tools, clumsy at first, but then slowly he adjusted, learned, tried again. And I realized something. This wasn't just about fixing machines, it was about fixing us. For the first time in decades, we were building something, together. Not just with tools and steel, but with forgiveness, humility, and love. And as he tightened the last bolt, Ethan looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm proud of you. More than I can ever say. And I want to be the kind of man you are." That was the moment I knew. The toolbox wasn't just mine anymore. It had always belonged to him, too. He just hadn't been ready to carry it until now. It's been months now since Ethan came back home, and I still remember the weight of that first hug in the garage. The bitterness I carried for 30 years didn't vanish overnight, but it loosened its grip. Every day since then has been about building, not just engines and machines, but trust, respect, and something we almost lost, our bond as father and son. The shop has changed since Ethan started working with me. He's still clumsy with the tools sometimes, still learning the difference between a socket wrench and a spanner, but he's got determination. And that determination reminds me of myself in my younger years, when all I had was grit and two strong hands. I've noticed something, too. At first, when neighbors came by with broken mowers or tractors, Ethan would hang back, embarrassed again, but in a different way this time. He wasn't ashamed of me anymore. He was ashamed of himself for not knowing how to fix the things I made look so easy. But little by little, he's been stepping forward, asking questions, trying, getting his hands dirty. One Saturday, a farmer named Mr. Lawson came by with his old tractor sputtering like a dying horse. I handed Ethan the wrench and said, "You take this one." He looked at me with wide eyes, panic written all over his face. "Dad, I'll mess it up." I shook my head. "Then you'll fix it again. That's how you learn." And he did. He struggled, cursed under his breath, wiped sweat from his forehead, and then finally got that engine roaring to life. The look on his face when Mr. Lawson shook his hand, thanked him, and drove away, that was worth more than a paycheck. That night, over dinner, Ethan said quietly, "You know, Dad, for the first time in years, I feel useful, not important. Useful." I smiled. "There's a difference, son. Important fades. Useful keeps you alive." He nodded, and I saw in his eyes that the lesson was sinking in. But the real turning point came not in the shop, but at his own dinner table a few weeks later. He invited me over, and his daughter, my granddaughter Emily, sat beside him. She's 16, bright-eyed, with the same hunger for learning her father once had. Over dinner, she asked, "Dad, what do you do now that you're not in the office anymore?" Ethan hesitated. For a moment, I thought I'd see that old shame flicker in his eyes, but instead he smiled. "I work with your grandpa," he said. "I fix engines, machines, things that people rely on, and I'm learning more from him than I ever did sitting behind a desk." Emily's eyes lit up. "That's awesome. Can you show me sometime?" Ethan looked at me then, and in that glance was everything I had waited decades to see: pride, gratitude, humility. Afterward, when she went upstairs, Ethan poured us both a drink and said, "Dad, I used to tell people I was embarrassed of what you did. Now I tell everyone I'm proud of it, proud of you. And if Emily ever asks me who taught me how to be a man, I'll point to you." I didn't cry often in my life, but that night I did, quietly. Looking back, I realized this story isn't about tools or jobs or even pride. It's about what we hand down, not just to our children, but to the world. For years, I thought the greatest gift I gave Ethan was his college degree, bought with my overtime hours. But I was wrong. The greatest gift was showing him that dignity doesn't come from letters after your name. It comes from showing up, rolling up your sleeves, and doing the work, no matter who's watching. We live in a world where people measure success in titles, salaries, and shiny things. But those can be stripped away in a moment, just like Ethan's job was. What can't be stripped away is resilience, the ability to start over, the humility to learn, the pride of earning with your own hands. That's what my toolbox carried all along. Not just hammers and wrenches, but lessons about life, struggle, and love. Lessons that my son finally understands, and that my granddaughter will one day inherit too. So when people ask me about my proudest moment, it's not sending my boy to college. It's not the years I survived at the factory. My proudest moment was watching Ethan lift that old toolbox, his eyes wet with tears, and hearing him say, "I'm proud of you, Dad," because in that moment I knew the truth. I never needed him to admire me. I only needed him to understand me. And now he does. And that's my story. A story about pride, about work, and about the love between a father and a son that took decades to find its way back home. If you take anything away from this, let it be this. Titles and degrees may come and go, but dignity, the kind you earn with your heart, your hands, and your sacrifice, lasts forever. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own family, or reminded you of someone you love, then I'd like to ask you for one small thing. Like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And don't forget to comment below. Tell me what you think, or even share your own story. I read every one, and I'd love to hear from you. Finally, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories about real people, real struggles, and the lessons that stay with us for life. Thank you for listening. And remember, never be ashamed of honest work, and never underestimate the power of a father's hands.